The most dangerous kind of silence is not the one that surrounds you, but the one that waits for you to realize you were never truly forgotten. I heard that sentence once long before I understood what it meant. At 26, I thought silence simply meant being alone, being ignored, or being too busy to notice what life was trying to tell you. I was wrong. That morning in New York City, I was standing in front of a mirror adjusting a simple beige coat while my phone vibrated endlessly on the kitchen counter. My mother's name appeared again and again on the screen. I already knew what she wanted before I answered. Another blind date. Another carefully arranged meeting with a man I had never met and would likely never see again. "Olivia, you cannot keep refusing," she said the moment I picked up. "You are 26, not 16. I closed my eyes briefly. "I know. Then act like it. Tonight 7 o'clock, the Grand Avenue Hotel. This one is different." "They all say that," I replied quietly. But she had already hung up. I stood there for a moment listening to the silence in my apartment. It felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing against my chest. I looked at myself again in the mirror. Nothing about me felt like a woman someone would fight for. Just someone being arranged, managed, positioned like a piece on a board. By the time evening arrived, the Grand Avenue Hotel looked like something out of another world. Crystal lights, polished floors, and people who spoke in low confident tones as if every word had value. I arrived 5 minutes early because I always did. It was a habit I never broke, even when everything else in my life felt like it was slipping out of my control. The hostess guided me to a private table near the glass wall overlooking the city skyline. New York stretched endlessly outside, glowing under the night sky. And then I saw him. He was already seated. No smile. No gesture. Just presence. Controlled. Quiet. Cold in a way that made the air around him feel different. He was not looking at me at first. Instead, he was staring at the city as if he had already seen everything it had to offer and decided none of it was worth reacting to. I hesitated. Before stepping forward. "Excuse me," I said softly. His eyes turned toward me. The moment our eyes met, something strange happened. Not attraction. Not recognition. Something deeper. Something unsettling. Like my name had already been spoken somewhere I could not remember. He stood slightly, just enough to acknowledge me. "Olivia Bennett." My breath paused. "Yes, Ethan Cole." His voice was calm, precise, and distant. But the way he said my name felt anything but distant. I sat down slowly, suddenly aware of how quiet the world around us had become. The city outside still moved, still lived, still existed, but inside that small table by the window time felt suspended. This was supposed to be just another blind date. Another polite conversation. Another wasted evening. Yet something about the man across from me did not fit that expectation. He did not ask typical questions. He did not smile politely. He simply watched me as if he had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. "I am not good at small talk," he said finally. "Neither am I," I replied without thinking. For the first time that evening, something almost like emotion flickered in his eyes. Very faint, very controlled, but real enough that I noticed. And in that quiet space between two strangers who should not have felt familiar at all, I had no idea that this was not the beginning of something new, but the continuation of something that had been waiting for 12 long years. The moment I sat across from Ethan Cole, I thought the strangest part of the evening had already happened. I was wrong, because silence has a way of revealing things you are not ready to understand. The waiter approached, but Ethan raised a hand slightly without looking away from me. "Just water," he said. "Nothing else." The waiter nodded and left. I noticed then how little effort he made to participate in the world around him. It was not arrogance. It was absence. As if most of the room simply did not exist unless he allowed it to. "So Olivia," he said after a pause, "what do you do?" "I work in marketing for a small publishing company." His eyes did not change. "Do you like it?" I hesitated. "I am not sure yet." That answer seemed to interest him more than it should have. "Not sure is more honest than most people are willing to be," he replied. I looked at him carefully. There was something about the way he spoke that felt precise, controlled, and strangely familiar. Not like déjà vu, something deeper. Like my life had already brushed against his before without me realizing it. "Do you always analyze people this quickly?" I asked before I could stop myself. A faint pause followed. Only when I already know the outcome, he said. The words made no sense in a normal conversation, yet he said them as if they were obvious. I glanced out the window trying to reset the moment. The city lights outside moved like distant stars. Everything looked normal. Everything except the feeling growing inside me that I was missing something important. Ethan, I said slowly, have we met before? The question hung in the air longer than I expected. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me more directly than before. For a brief second, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. Then it disappeared. No, he said calmly. I would remember. His tone should have ended the conversation. But it did not. Because something about the way he said it sounded less like truth and more like protection. We continued the meal, though it felt less like a date and more like a quiet investigation neither of us admitted we were conducting. He asked simple questions, but his attention was never simple. It was steady, focused, almost as if he was studying patterns rather than listening to answers. I found myself speaking more honestly than I intended. About work. About feeling stuck. About the strange sense that my life was always moving but never arriving anywhere meaningful. At one point I laughed softly at something I said, and I noticed his gaze shift slightly. You do that often, he said. What? Laugh when you are trying not to. I blinked. I am not aware of that. You are, he replied quietly. You just do not notice it. I should have found it strange. Instead, I felt exposed in a way that was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. As if he could see details I had never pointed out to myself. When the check arrived, I reached for it instinctively, but Ethan had already taken it. I can pay for myself, I said. I am sure you can, he replied. That is not the point. I frowned slightly. Then what is the point? He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Some things are not meant to be divided, he said. Not even equally. The statement lingered long after the waiter returned and left again. When we finally stood to leave, I expected a polite goodbye. A simple end to an unusual evening. Instead, Ethan paused beside me near the restaurant entrance. Olivia, he said quietly. I turned toward him. This was not random. The words were calm, almost indifferent, but they carried weight. I did not understand what he meant. Before I could ask, he stepped back slightly, his expression once again controlled and distant. Good night, Olivia. And just like that, he was gone into the city crowd, leaving me standing beneath the warm hotel lights with a feeling I could not explain. Because deep inside, something told me this was not the first time Ethan Cole had looked at my life from the shadows. And it would not be the last. The next morning felt different before I even opened my eyes. Not because anything had changed on the surface, but because something inside me had shifted after the night before. Ethan Cole's words kept replaying in my mind like fragments of a dream I could not fully piece together. This was not random. I stood in my kitchen staring at my phone for a long time before I finally checked it. No messages. No follow-up. Nothing from him. That should have been normal. Instead, it felt intentional. As if silence itself was part of his communication. I arrived at work earlier than usual, hoping routine would pull me back into something familiar. My office was small, filled with stacked drafts, coffee cups, and half-finished campaign notes. My manager was already there reviewing schedules. You look distracted today, she said without looking up. I am fine, I replied automatically. She raised an eyebrow. That means you are not fine. I almost laughed because she was right, but I did not explain. How do you explain a stranger who feels less like a stranger every hour that passes? Around noon, I was called into an unexpected meeting with a client representative. When I entered the conference room, I stopped immediately. Ethan Cole was sitting at the far end of the table, calm, composed, waiting. My heart reacted before my mind caught up. You did not mention you would be here, I said carefully. He looked up from the documents in front of him. I did not think it was necessary. Of course you did not, I thought, but did not say. The room felt smaller than it should have. Everyone else introduced themselves, but I barely heard them. My attention stayed fixed on him. The same controlled posture. The same quiet intensity. But something else now too. Awareness. As if he had already predicted every reaction I would have before I walked in. The meeting began. Numbers were discussed. Strategies reviewed. Deadlines adjusted. I contributed when necessary, but my focus kept drifting back to Ethan. He never interrupted, never spoke over anyone. Yet every time he did speak, the room shifted slightly toward him without anyone noticing. After the meeting ended, people began to leave. I gathered my notes quickly, ready to escape before my thoughts became more obvious. Olivia, Ethan said. I stopped. Wait. I turned slowly. Yes. He stood but did not move closer. Instead, he placed a thin folder on the table between us. I reviewed your proposal, he said. It is better than most people at your level produce. That should have sounded like praise. Instead, it felt like something more precise. Measured. Personal in a way that made no sense. Thank you, I said cautiously. There is a condition, he added. I frowned slightly. Condition? You will be working directly with me on the next phase. My pulse paused for half a second. That was not part of the agreement. It is now, he replied simply. I should have refused immediately. Any reasonable person would have questioned it. But I did not. Because something about the way he looked at me made refusal feel less like rejection and more like avoidance. Why me? I asked quietly. For the first time, something unreadable crossed his expression. Not emotion. Not hesitation. Something closer to memory. Because he said after a long pause, you are already part of it. I stood still, trying to understand what that meant. But before I could ask, he picked up his coat and walked toward the door. Olivia, he said without turning around. I stopped again. This is not the beginning. Then he left. The words stayed behind longer than he did. I stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by silence again. But this time it felt different. He was not a stranger I had met by chance. And I was beginning to realize I might have been part of his life long before I ever knew his name. That night, I could not stop thinking about what Ethan Cole had said in the conference room. This is not the beginning. It should have been confusing enough to dismiss. Instead, it stayed with me like a sentence missing its final word. I sat at my apartment window long after midnight watching the city lights of New York blur into one another. For the first time, I noticed how quiet my life actually was. No calls. No plans. No real direction beyond work. And yet Ethan Cole had walked into it and somehow made everything feel like it had already been arranged long before I arrived. The next morning, I received a message from his assistant requesting a formal meeting at Cole Enterprises headquarters. No explanation. No context. Just time and location. When I arrived at the building, I understood immediately that this was not a normal corporate office. The lobby was quiet, almost controlled. Every movement felt intentional. Security guided me to a private elevator without asking questions. As the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the polished metal surface. I looked the same, but I did not feel the same. The elevator opened directly into a top-floor suite overlooking Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling glass surrounded the entire space, revealing a city that seemed distant and unreachable. Ethan was already there, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city below as if he had been waiting there for a long time. You came, he said without turning around. I did not have much of a choice, I replied carefully. He finally turned toward me. You always have a choice, Olivia. Something about the way he said my name made the room feel smaller. I walked further inside, stopping a few feet away from him. Why am I here? A long silence followed. Then he moved toward a desk and placed a thin file in front of me. Open it. I hesitated before sitting down and doing as he said. Inside were documents, reports, records, familiar formats. But as I read the first page, my breathing slowed. It was my employment history, my academic background, my financial records, my entire life summarized in clean clinical lines. What is this? I asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched me carefully. I have been following your career for 12 years, he said finally. The words did not register at first. 12 years. I repeated. That is impossible. He stepped closer, but not enough to make me uncomfortable. Nothing about his presence felt chaotic. It felt controlled, deliberate. I first saw you when you were 16, he continued. At a charity scholarship event. You were not supposed to be there. You were not even on the official list. My mind raced backward, trying to connect memories I had almost forgotten. I remember he said before I could respond, "You were the only person who asked a question no one else dared to ask." I stared at him, unsure how to respond. Why would you remember that? His expression shifted slightly. Not softer, just more distant. Because I never forgot you after that moment. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had experienced before. I slowly closed the file in front of me. "This does not make sense," I said. "It will," he replied. I stood up immediately. 12 years, Ethan. Do you understand how that sounds? He did not react to my frustration. Instead, he walked back toward the window. "I do. That is why I never approached you." I watched him, trying to understand a man who seemed to exist both inside and outside of every explanation I had. "Then why now?" I asked. He turned slightly, just enough for me to see his expression clearly. "Because you are finally in a place where I can no longer stay silent," he said. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized the truth was not something he was revealing to me. It was something he had been carrying alone for 12 years, while I lived a life that never once knew I was being watched. For a long moment after Ethan Cole finished speaking, I could not move. The city outside the glass walls of his office kept shifting, cars moving like distant lights across a map I no longer felt part of. 12 years. The number echoed in my mind without stopping. I finally broke the silence first. "You cannot just say something like that and expect me to understand it immediately." Ethan did not look surprised by my reaction. In fact, he looked as if he had already predicted every word I would say. "I do not expect you to understand it immediately," he replied calmly. "Then why tell me at all?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Because you are finally here," he said. The words felt simple, but the weight behind them was not. I turned away from him, walking a few steps toward the glass wall. The entire city stretched beneath us. People moving. Lives continuing. Normality that suddenly felt very far away from where I stood. "You said you saw me when I was 16, I said quietly. "Yes. That was 6 years before I even met you tonight." "I still do not understand what you were doing then." Ethan remained near the desk, his presence steady, unchanged. "I was not supposed to be part of your life," he said. "But I was there anyway." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to organize thoughts that refused to align. "Why?" I asked. "Why me?" A long silence followed. This time it was different. He was not avoiding the answer. He was choosing it carefully. "Because you saved someone," he said. I turned back immediately. "What?" 12 years ago, there was a scholarship event at a hospital foundation, he continued. A child had an emergency situation during the gathering. Everyone panicked. No one knew what to do. But you did. My mind searched through memories I had almost forgotten. I was 16. That was impossible. I did not even know what I was doing half the time at 16. "You stayed calm," he said. "You helped the staff guide people. You spoke to the child until help arrived." I stared at him, trying to determine if this was some kind of misunderstanding. "I barely remember that day," I admitted. "I remember it completely," he replied. The certainty in his voice made my chest tighten. I walked back toward the chair and sat down slowly. "This is still not a reason to follow someone for 12 years, I said. "I never followed you," he corrected gently. I watched. There is a difference. The distinction did not make it easier. It made it more unsettling. Ethan stepped closer again, but still kept distance between us. "After that day, I began asking questions," he said. "I wanted to know who you were. I wanted to know if what I saw was real." "And?" I whispered. "It was." His answer was immediate. "No hesitation." No doubt. I looked down at my hands, trying to steady myself. "This is too much," I said. "This is not normal." "I agree," he said quietly. "But it is true." I lifted my gaze to him again. "And what does that mean now?" Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the city once more, as if searching for something only he could see. "It means," he said finally, "that everything you think is random about your life is not." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I stood up again, slowly, my thoughts spiraling. "You are saying my entire life has been connected to you somehow?" "I am saying," he replied calmly, "that I have never stopped being connected to you. And for the first time since this all began, I realized this was no longer about a blind date or a strange coincidence. It was about a truth that had been waiting far longer than I had ever existed in his world. For the rest of the night, I could not bring myself to leave Ethan Cole's office. Not because he asked me to stay. He did not. And not because I felt comfortable. I did not. I stayed because leaving felt like stepping away from something I still did not understand but could no longer ignore. Ethan stood near the window again, as if distance from people was his natural position. The city below had already turned darker, lights scattering across the river like fragments of something broken and beautiful at the same time. I finally broke the silence. If what you are saying is true, then why approach me now? My voice was quieter this time. Controlled. Ethan did not turn immediately. When he finally did, his expression was unreadable again. Because timing matters, he said. That answer frustrated me more than it should have. Timing for what? I asked. He walked slowly toward the desk, stopping beside the folder that still held fragments of my life I had never seen before. For you to be ready, he said. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. Ready for what exactly? Ethan studied me for a long moment. Not as a stranger, not as a client, but as if I was a variable in a system he had been calculating for a very long time. For the truth, he said finally. I shook my head slightly. You keep saying truth like it explains everything. It does not. He did not argue. Instead, he reached into the folder and pulled out another document. This one was older, the edges slightly worn. He placed it on the table between us without speaking. I hesitated before picking it up. It was a photograph. At first, I did not recognize the setting. A hospital lobby. Crowded. Bright. People moving in different directions. Then I saw myself. 16 years old. Standing near a group of volunteers. I looked younger. Smaller. Uncertain but focused. And beside me in the background, partially out of frame, was a boy. I stared at it longer. That is you, I said slowly. Ethan nodded. I did not remember him. Not clearly. But something about the angle, the posture, the stillness in the background felt familiar in a way I could not explain. You were there, I said. Yes, he replied. I lowered the photo slightly. Why? His answer came slower this time. Because I had already seen what kind of person you were becoming. I looked up immediately. That is not possible. It is, he said calmly. People reveal themselves early. You just have to know how to look. The weight of his words settled in the space between us. I placed the photograph back on the desk carefully, as if it might disappear if I moved too quickly. So what now? I asked. Now you understand why I cannot treat this as random, he said. I stepped back slightly. And what exactly are you planning to do with that understanding? For the first time that night, something changed in his expression. Not emotion. Not softness. Something closer to certainty. I am not planning, he said quietly. I have already been building toward it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. You are speaking as if this was always going to happen, I said. It was, he replied. I stared at him, trying to find logic in something that refused to behave logically. You cannot plan a person's life like this, I said. I am not planning your life, Ethan said. I am returning to it. The words hit differently than anything he had said before. I did not respond immediately, because somewhere deep down I realized the most unsettling part was not that he had been watching me. It was the possibility that he had been waiting for a moment I had not yet reached until now. The silence in Ethan Cole's office that night was different from any silence I had experienced before. It was no longer empty. It was filled with everything that had not been said for 12 years. I stood near the glass wall again, staring at the city below, trying to slow my thoughts. But every answer he gave only created more questions. Behind me, Ethan remained still, as if he was waiting for me to reach a conclusion on my own. I finally turned around. You keep saying you are returning to my life, I said quietly. But I never invited you into it. Ethan did not react immediately. He walked slowly toward the desk, his movements controlled, measured, deliberate. You did not have to, he said. That answer made something tighten in my chest. Then why me? I asked again. Why not someone else? Why not approach me like a normal person instead of doing all of this from a distance for years? He stopped beside the desk, looking at the city once more before speaking. Because normal was never an option, he said. I frowned. That does not answer anything. It does, he replied calmly. It answers everything I needed to know. I stepped closer, frustration building now. You are talking like I belong to some plan you already decided. His eyes finally met mine again. No, Olivia, he said quietly. I am talking like someone who stopped pretending fate was random a long time ago. The words felt heavy, almost unsettling in their certainty. I looked away briefly, trying to regain control of the situation. You cannot build your life around a person you barely know, I said. Ethan's expression shifted slightly, just enough for me to notice. I do not barely know you, he said. That was the first time his voice carried something closer to emotion. Not warmth, not softness. Something deeper. Something rooted. I turned back toward him slowly. Then what do you think you know? A long pause followed. The kind of pause that does not come from uncertainty, but from restraint. Everything you think you learned on your own, he said, I already knew before you lived it. My breath caught. That sounds impossible. He stepped closer but still maintained distance. Not physical distance. Emotional control. You think I appeared in your life recently, he said. But I have been present in ways you never noticed. I shook my head slightly, refusing to accept it so easily. That does not make sense, I said. It does not have to, he replied. Just has to be true. I stared at him, searching for anything that looked like manipulation, exaggeration, or fantasy. But there was none. Only certainty. Only calm conviction. I finally spoke again, my voice quieter now. If what you are saying is real, then why stay hidden for so long? For the first time that night, something shifted in his expression again. Not regret. Not hesitation. Something closer to memory. Because he said slowly, I needed to make sure I would never step into your life at the wrong time. I blinked. The wrong time? Yes, he said. Timing was the only thing I could not afford to fail. I felt my hands tighten slightly at my sides. This entire conversation felt like standing in front of a door I was not sure I wanted to open, but could no longer walk away from. Ethan Cole was not simply telling me he had known me for years. He was telling me that every moment of my life had been measured against something I had never been aware of. And in that silence, I finally understood the most unsettling part of all. I was not stepping into his story. I was already inside it. The moment I left Ethan Cole's office, the night air outside felt colder than I remembered. New York City was still alive beneath the lights, but I felt strangely disconnected from it, as if I had stepped out of the world I understood and into one I no longer recognized. Everything he said kept repeating in my mind in fragments that refused to form a clear shape. I have been present in ways you never noticed. I needed to make sure I would never step into your life at the wrong time. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, not fully aware of where I was going, until I found myself stopping near a quiet street corner. Cars passed. People talked. Life continued normally for everyone else. But nothing about my thoughts felt normal anymore. I finally took out my phone and stared at it for a long time. There was no message from him. No explanation. Just silence again. Yet this time silence felt different. It felt intentional, like something was being held back on purpose. When I arrived home, I did not turn on the lights immediately. I sat on the edge of my sofa in the dark for several minutes, trying to organize everything I had learned. A man I met only recently claimed he had known me for 12 years. He said he had watched my life without stepping into it. And worse, he said everything I thought was random was not. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on anything familiar. My childhood. My school. My work. My relationships. Nothing connected to him in any obvious way. And yet, the certainty in his voice made doubt feel unavoidable. The next morning, I went into work earlier than usual, hoping routine would give me clarity. It did not. Every task felt distant. Every conversation sounded muted. By midday, I could no longer ignore the fact that I was waiting for something I could not define. And then it happened. My assistant knocked and entered quickly. There is someone here to see you, she said. I frowned slightly. I am in the middle of work. She hesitated. It is Mr. Cole. My body reacted before my mind did. I stood immediately. Where is he? Conference room 2, she replied. I walked faster than I intended, my thoughts already colliding before I reached the door. When I stepped inside, Ethan Cole was standing near the window again. Same posture. Same calm presence. as if he had never left that position in the first place. You came early, he said without turning around. You did not give me much choice yesterday, I replied. He finally turned to face me. I am not here to repeat yesterday, he said. Then why are you here? I asked. He walked toward the table and placed a single envelope down. This time it was not a file. It was something smaller, more personal. What is this? I asked cautiously. Open it, he said. I hesitated before picking it up. Inside was a photograph, but it was not recent. It was old. The edges slightly worn, the colors softened by time. I stared at it longer than I expected to. It showed a younger version of me. Much younger. I froze. That is not possible, I said immediately. Ethan did not respond. Instead, he watched me carefully. Where did you get this? My voice dropped slightly. From a time you do not remember clearly, he said. I shook my head. I remember my childhood. Not all of it, he said quietly. Only what you were meant to. The words made something shift inside me. I looked at the photograph again, trying to place it. The setting was unfamiliar. Yet my face in it was undeniably mine. Why do you have this? I asked again. Ethan stepped closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. Because this is where everything started, he said. My breath slowed. What started? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the photograph in my hand. Then at me. 12 years ago, he said quietly, I made a decision that changed everything about both of our lives. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. And for the first time, I understood that Ethan Cole was no longer revealing pieces of a story. He was preparing me for the truth I had been living inside without ever knowing it. The moment Ethan Cole said those words, the room felt completely still. 12 years ago, I made a decision that changed everything about both of our lives. I stood there holding the photograph, my fingers tightening slightly around the edges as if it might help me stay grounded. Nothing about this felt real anymore. It was as if I had stepped outside of my own timeline and was now being shown pieces of a story I had lived but never understood. I finally spoke, my voice quieter than before. You are saying that my entire life has been influenced by something I do not even remember? Ethan did not answer immediately. He walked slowly toward the window again, as if collecting thoughts that had been carefully organized for a very long time. Not influenced, he said. Connected. The distinction meant nothing to me in that moment. I shook my head slightly. This is too much, I said. You cannot expect me to accept this without explanation. He turned back toward me, his expression still controlled, but now something deeper was visible beneath it. I am not asking you to accept it all at once, he said. I am asking you to listen. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced before. I lowered myself into the chair slowly, still holding the photograph. Then explain, I said. Ethan took a slow breath, as if this part had never been easy for him either. 12 years ago, he began, there was an incident at a foundation event. You were there. I was 16, I interrupted quietly. Yes, he said. But that is not the part that matters most. I stayed silent, waiting. There was a child that day, he continued. A medical emergency. People panicked. Staff lost coordination. And in the middle of it, you stepped forward. I frowned slightly, trying to remember more clearly. I do not remember anything extraordinary, I said. That is because you were not trying to be extraordinary, he replied. You were simply responding. His words created a strange pause inside me. I looked down at the photograph again. The younger version of myself looked unfamiliar yet strangely determined. What does that have to do with anything now? I asked. Everything, he said. I stayed quiet. Ethan stepped closer, but only enough that his voice felt clearer, not closer. After that day, I began asking questions about you, he said. Not because I intended to interfere, but because I could not ignore what I had seen. I studied your path, your choices, the way you reacted to pressure, the way you treated people when no one was watching. I felt my chest tighten slightly. You are describing me like a case study, I said. No, he replied immediately. I am describing consistency. I looked up at him, unsure what to feel. You keep saying you were watching me, I said slowly. But for what purpose? Ethan paused. This time the silence felt different, more fragile. Because, he said quietly, I recognized something in you that I thought I had lost long ago. I waited, but he did not continue immediately. When he finally did, his voice lowered. Something I never believed I would find again. I stood up slowly, still holding the photograph. You are not answering the question, I said. He looked at me directly now. I am, he replied. You just have not reached the part where it makes sense yet. I felt a strange tension building inside me. Frustration. Confusion. Something deeper I could not name. Then tell me where this leads, I said. Ethan's expression remained steady. Leads here, he said. To you standing in front of me, finally seeing what I have seen for 12 years. The words settled heavily between us. And for the first time since this began, I realized I was no longer being introduced to a truth. I was being asked to accept that my entire life had already been part of one.